For most people, intimacy is born from passion, affection, and human connection. But for the Spartans, it was nothing of the sort. In their world, sex wasn't an act of love. It was an order, a duty, a command from the state itself, carried out with one single purpose: to manufacture warriors, not nurture families. The goal wasn't pleasure or emotion. It was perfection in flesh and blood. Spartans weren't raised to live. They were constructed to fight. Each citizen was a carefully forged instrument in the machinery of war, and that forging didn't begin with sword or shield. It began in the most private of places, the bedroom. Forget the romanticized image of heroic warriors draped in crimson cloaks and giving glorious speeches. Behind that legend lies something far darker, a cold, calculated system of human engineering so extreme that even the cruelest dystopian stories pale in comparison. At the center of this terrifying order was the total control of reproduction. In Sparta, love was irrelevant and personal choice didn't exist. The state alone decided who would marry, who would breed, and ultimately, who was worthy of creating the next generation of soldiers. Elder magistrates, men hardened by a lifetime of battle, would inspect young citizens like breeders at a market. They measured height, endurance, and bloodline with ruthless precision. A tall, broad-shouldered warrior descended from decorated ancestors might be matched with a strong, wide-hipped woman known for her fertility. Beauty wasn't vanity. It was proof of health, a sign of pure, superior blood. Marriage in Sparta wasn't about affection. It was a contract of genetics, a cold calculation to produce stronger sons for war. Love didn't matter. Desire wasn't required. In the end, every Spartan body, man or woman, belonged to the state. Their lives, their choices, even their most intimate acts were dictated by one unyielding command: serve Sparta. Every heartbeat in Sparta was expected to serve one purpose: the strength of the state. Bloodlines were not personal legacies, but tools of survival. And in this brutal design, even women were reshaped into instruments of the nation's will. They weren't viewed as wives, nor even as mothers in the traditional sense. They were vessels of the Spartan ideal, valued not for tenderness or companionship, but for the power of their bodies to bear strong, healthy offspring. From the moment they could walk, Spartan girls were trained with a singular goal: to create warriors. They ran across fields, wrestled other girls, hurled javelins under the burning sun, all to mold their bodies into the perfect machines of fertility. They weren't preparing for battle, yet their lives were bound to it. Their battlefield was the birthing bed, and their victory was a newborn soldier. Their will didn't matter. Their feelings didn't matter. Only their bodies did. But Sparta's obsession with perfection went further, far beyond anything most societies would dare imagine. What happened if a great warrior's wife could not conceive? Or if she gave birth to weak or sickly children? And what if, somewhere else, there lived a woman of remarkable strength and beauty, trapped in marriage to a frail, aging husband? Sparta had an answer, a law as cold as it was calculated. A warrior of proven strength could be ordered, even encouraged, to impregnate another man's wife. It wasn't considered infidelity, it was duty. A woman's womb could be loaned to the state like a weapon or a field of harvest. Husbands often accepted this arrangement with pride, not jealousy, believing that producing a strong child, even by another man, was an honor to their household and to Sparta itself. Love was irrelevant. Fidelity was meaningless. In Sparta, the only virtue was strength, and the only sin was weakness. And when that child was finally born, there was no celebration, no gentle lullaby to welcome new life. Instead came a test. The infant wasn't placed in its mother's arms, but taken to a grim, echoing place known as the lair, the gathering hall. There, under the dim light of torches, stood the Gerousia, a council of aged warriors who had seen death too many times to flinch at it now. They examined each newborn without emotion. Naked and trembling, the baby was inspected from head to toe. Its limbs stretched, its cry analyzed, its spine and joints scrutinized for any flaw. Every weakness, no matter how small, could decide its fate. To the Spartans, this wasn't cruelty, it was logic, a ruthless arithmetic of survival. They lived as a small, elite warrior caste, surrounded by tens of thousands of enslaved helots, who outnumbered them 10 to 1. In such a world, weakness was not a private matter. It was a danger to the entire city. A single frail child could one day become a burden in battle, a liability in a society built entirely on strength. Mercy today, they believed, could mean destruction tomorrow. Sparta's creed was absolute. Only the strong shall live. If the infant passed the test, it was returned to its family, not as a son to be cherished, but as property of the state, a future soldier already claimed by Sparta. From the moment a Spartan child drew its first breath, its life was not its own. It belonged to the state. Every heartbeat, every step, every drop of blood existed for one purpose: to strengthen Sparta. But not every child was deemed worthy of that purpose. When a baby was born, it wasn't wrapped in blankets or cradled in its mother's arms. Instead, it was taken to a bleak place known as the Lay, the gathering hall. There, the Jerusia, a council of aged warriors hardened by decades of war, awaited. These men, who had stared death in the face countless times, examined each infant without compassion. Naked and trembling, the baby was inspected for strength, for symmetry, for the promise of perfection. If the child showed even the slightest sign of weakness, a curved spine, a limp cry, a frail limb, it was condemned. The infant was carried to the rugged slopes of Mount Taygetus and left to die. To outsiders it was cruelty. To the Spartans it was discipline. They believed that sparing the weak was a danger to the strong, that mercy today could mean destruction tomorrow. In their eyes, the survival of the city outweighed the life of any single child. Those who survived this first test would face trials that were far worse. At the age of 7, boys were torn away from their families and cast into the agoge, a state-run military training system that would shape them into weapons. There were no soft beds or warm meals waiting for them. They slept on beds of reeds, bathed in cold water, and wore a single coarse tunic through both the searing summers and the freezing winters. Food was scarce by design. Hunger was a lesson. They were taught to steal to survive, but punished if caught, not because stealing was wrong, but because failure was unacceptable. Pain became a daily companion, and fear was not allowed to exist. Every blow, every scar, every sleepless night was meant to harden their spirit and carve away weakness. They were beaten until they learned silence. Their speech became sharp and brief, each word a weapon. From this training came the term laconic, meaning few words but heavy meaning. To be Spartan was to speak little, to act fast, and to never show emotion. At 15, the boys faced their first true ordeal: the ritual at the altar of Artemis Orthia. It was not a test of skill, but of endurance. To reach the altar, they had to run through a gauntlet of men armed with whips. Blood splattered the ground as they were lashed, yet they were forbidden to scream. To cry out in pain was shame, to endure it in silence was honor. Some died before they reached the altar, but those who lived were changed forever. They were no longer boys, they were soldiers. But the final trial was darker still, a secret ritual known as the Cryptia. It turned young warriors into shadows of death. Each year, the Spartan government declared war on the Helots, the enslaved population that toiled in their fields and vastly outnumbered them. Under cover of darkness, these young men were sent into the countryside with daggers and orders to kill any Helot who appeared strong, defiant, or intelligent. It was not combat, it was silent extermination. A grim rite of passage to prove their loyalty and their ability to kill without hesitation. By the time a Spartan man turned 30, he had earned his place among the elite. Only then was he allowed to marry, but even this was not an act of love. The state chose his wife, pairing citizens like breeding stock to produce the strongest possible children. A man might visit his wife only in secrecy, just long enough to ensure the continuation of his bloodline. Love was weakness, emotion was a distraction. What mattered was the next generation of warriors. Women too were molded by this ideology. From childhood, Spartan girls trained their bodies, running, wrestling, and throwing javelins, not to fight, but to bear strong children. Their battlefield was the birthing bed. Their duty was to bring life into the world and to raise it without tenderness. A Spartan mother did not weep when her son went to war. She handed him his shield and said, "Return with it or upon it." For centuries, this ruthless system worked. Sparta produced the most feared warriors of the ancient world, men who could fight without fear, march without rest, and die without question. Their discipline, their endurance, their unity made them legends. But perfection came with a cost. Each battle that claimed a Spartan life also claimed a future father. Their obsession with strength led to decline. They valued purity over adaptability, bloodline over innovation. And while their enemies evolved, Sparta remained chained to its own ideals. In time, the empire that prided itself on invincibility began to wither. The fields fell silent, the barracks emptied. The once mighty city became a monument to its own brutality. Sparta had succeeded in creating perfect warriors, but in doing so, it had erased everything human within them. their story endures as both legend and warning.